Very warm welcome from me to Cardiff University and Cardiff Business School. Those of you who don't know me, I'm Melanie Jones. I'm a professor of economics at the Business School, and I've relatively recently taken over as the lead for the Wales Forum of the Productivity Institute. So thank you for joining us here today in National Productivity Week, where we're going to launch our report about Wales's productivity challenge. The Wales Forum brings together academics, experts in relation to business, public sector delivery, and public policy. And together what we aim to do is to better understand Wales's productivity challenge and really look to generate solutions to improve productivity in Wales. So I thank all the members of the forum for their contribution to the report and their ongoing insights that we share across different practice. In terms of the Wales Forum, so we're one of 8 of regional forums of the Productivity Institute. We are here today to launch our report, which looks at not just the challenge, but hopefully focuses very much on the future. What can we do about that? The report is an update to a previous report written by the forum and my predecessor, Andrew Henley, and really the attention of the forum has been very much in how we think about productivity in terms of improving well-being within Wales, within that policy context. And we've linked it very much to the Future Generations Act, because productivity is such a persistent and a long-term challenge that the kind of solutions that we're going to recommend are very much about future benefits and about actually those intergenerational benefits, improving the lives of future generations. So in terms of an agenda for today, a welcome from me, obviously, and I'm going to hand over in a moment to Professor Bart van Ark, who actually coordinates the Productivity Institute at a UK level. So he has the job of coordinating the work across the forum, and I think has had a very busy week attending lots of forum events. We're delighted that he's been able to join us in Wales. Then I'm going to talk a bit about the report, some of the key overarching findings, before welcoming 2 speakers to comment on the report. First of all, we're really pleased to have Gregory Thwaites from the Resolution Foundation, not least because he brings an external expertise, so from outside Wales, and people I'm sure will know the work of the Resolution Foundation in converting, good quality, rigorous, quantitative evidence into really accessible key messages around policy and public messages about the importance of living standards, inequality, all the things that I think are really important to tie productivity to. Then I'm going to hand over to Robert Lloyd-Griffiths from ICAEW. He's also known to us in terms of being the chair of the Wales Forum, so he brings a rich business expertise to that forum, and today he's going to bring a business perspective on Wales's productivity challenge. Then we're going to very much open the floor to you. We would like your insights in terms of supporting that productivity agenda that we're going to set out, but also are there areas that we've missed? Are there other things that we need to consider? So we're going to take questions both from the audience in the room and the online audience. And then we're going to try and close by about 4:30. So maybe if I hand over now to Bart to welcome you on behalf of the Productivity Institute.
Thanks a lot, Melanie, and good afternoon, everyone. And it's my real honor. My name is Bart van Ark. I'm the, as Melanie said, the managing director of the Productivity Institute and a professor at the University of Manchester. And it's a real honor to be here again, because the first National Productivity Week, which was in November 2023, I also managed to make it here in this same room. And at that time, Andy Henley, who's with us today, was still running this, but Melanie, in the meantime, has taken this over. And here we are again. Discussing issues around productivity. Even at that time, we predicted it was not going to go, wasn't going to solve itself immediately, and therefore we still need to keep working on this. So it's really nice to be back here. This indeed is the second National Productivity Week, which really is a big awareness campaign. We have 27 events around the country this week. Really trying to bring in people from academia and research, but also from the business community and from the policy community. And the tagline for this week is smarter working and better growth. And that's really sort of the two main themes we've really been talking about this week. One is smarter working, which is really about how the business community itself can find ways to improve their productivity. There's a whole program at the Productivity Institute around strategic productivity. We've had events this week, actually we had 3 events this week around the role of AI, which is obviously the big topic. But we also have had events around the role of the CHRO. We have a big webinar tomorrow morning. So if you have still some appetite, you can still register for that tomorrow at 8:30. We have a big webinar on strategic productivity with a CFO on, a CHRO and a CIO on how they're thinking about these issues from their business perspective. But the other line is better growth. And that is, yes, we need productivity. We need companies to do significantly better. But we also want to make sure that as many people, as many firms, as many places can benefit from this, so that we ultimately can create inclusive growth. And that is why we've asked all our 8 productivity forums, which, by the way, as of today, will become 9, because we're also launching a productivity forum in the west of England and the southwest, very close to you. We have asked all our productivity forums to indeed update their previous work, which they did in 2021. All these reports are available on our website, but there is also a full report that is sort of summarizing each of those with a little introduction on what the challenges are that each of the regions and devolved nations in the UK are facing. Now, as Melanie will tell us in a minute, we have challenges in Wales, where Wales was still sort of, at the lower end of the mix in terms of productivity performance 2 or 3 years ago. We're now actually at a real low end. That's partly because other places just have been doing slightly better. None of us are really doing particularly great. We have a nationwide problem, but we also have specific challenges here in Wales that we will talk about this afternoon. But at the same time, there's also good news, and that I think we have increasingly the ear of the government here in Cardiff. Of course, the national government is also very focused on this topic of productivity. So there are possibilities for us to also really influence policy, help policy thinking around this to improve, both from a Welsh perspective as well as from a UK-wide perspective. So I'm really looking forward to having that discussion this afternoon. And indeed, the other tagline of National Productivity Week is unlocking the UK's productivity potential. Now, if you're far behind, the good news is that you have a lot of opportunity and a lot of potential. So let's spend this afternoon on how we can unlock the Welsh productivity potential, and I'm really looking forward to hear more about that. Welcome, and hope to talk to you a little bit later as well. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Bart. And if it applies to the UK, it certainly applies to Wales as a region. So we have lots of opportunities to catch up. I am going to talk really at a very high level about the report. So the link to the report is there, and it will come out in an email following the event. So if you want to read the report in depth, it is available online. It includes many more facts and figures than I'm going to present here today. I really want to focus on not so much the challenge, which I know many of you will be very familiar with, but actually much more about what we think might be a way forward to try and increase productivity in Wales. So productivity, the first thing that I realized when I took over from Andy is that productivity means very different things to different people. When I talk about productivity, I'm talking about outputs for a given set of inputs. And when I talk about output, I'm typically talking about the value of goods and services. So it doesn't necessarily just mean the units. It could mean greater value in terms of the outputs. In terms of Wales's productivity challenge, again, it's not necessarily one straightforward thing. It's actually a combination, but I'm going to focus on one of the dimensions of it. So when I talk about it in the report, then I'm talking about 3 separate things. First of all, as Bart has already mentioned, the kind of traditional UK productivity puzzle, the slowdown in the rate of growth of productivity that's happened since the financial crisis for the UK as a whole, and has been shared across regions in the UK. It has meant that there's now internationally a gap between the UK and many other industrialized countries. The Wales shares that, but Wales has additional challenges. It has a challenge particularly around its relative position in terms of a region in the UK. So if you look at Wales relative to the UK average, you'll see a gap which is now about minus 17%. So as Bart said, that's not just relative to the UK average, but actually if you look across all the regions, Wales is currently the lowest in terms of a regional performance. For me, the other dimension of that is that it's been persistent. So it has stayed virtually constant across decades, and we've seen no real evidence that Wales is converging on the UK average. So it's a real stubborn problem. That's what I'm really going to focus on today, and what probably has been the focus of the work of the forum, but I think there are other dimensions that should also be borne in mind. One of them is that Wales has intra-regional variation in itself. So when we talk about Wales, we are a low productivity region, and indeed all the areas within Wales would have productivity below the UK average. But even within Wales, we have disparities. We have, I think, 3 of the 5 lowest productivity areas in the UK. But within Wales, if you look at relative to the Welsh average, we also have areas like Cardiff, Newport, and I think Flintshire and Wrexham at the north, those areas that tend to be on the border and better connected with outside, which do have productivity levels higher than the Wales average. So we have disparities within Wales, and I think in focusing on trying to tackle the Wales UK challenge, we need to bear that in mind. Whenever I'm doing analysis, one of the first things that I will say is, what's the UK average? The UK is made up of lots of different regions, and actually is that a representative of anything? And you can see, first of all, in this chart, which plots productivity on the horizontal axis, and the most recent data we have on productivity, that the regions vary considerably, especially looking at London and the southeast. So the UK average is very much dragged up by London and the southeast, which means that actually, if you look at regional variation outside that, it is much smaller. Nevertheless, if you look at Wales, which is the yellow, it's actually the closest to the origin, so it has the lowest levels of productivity. And therefore, the gap relative to the UK average, which is the dashed lines, is actually the largest of any region. The other dimension to this graphic is that persistence. So this is the growth in productivity on the vertical axis, which essentially shows since the financial crisis what's been the growth in productivity. And you can see that Wales there is pretty similar to the UK average. So we haven't really got much better, but we haven't got much worse. That idea of this persistent gap between Wales and the UK average. And I think the interesting contrast here when you break down the regions is particularly in relation to the other devolved nations of Northern Ireland and Scotland, where we do see evidence of faster growth in productivity since 2008. And we've had a nice discussion, which I'm sure Bart would like me to mention in terms of his latest podcast, with the devolved nations about the sustainability, really, particularly of Northern Ireland's recent growth. But nevertheless, for me, it signals that the situation isn't inevitable, that there are potential opportunities for regions that are performing poorly to converge on the UK average. So the big question, okay, we've got this problem, what's the driver of it? And that, I think, is fundamentally a very difficult question to answer, because there's no single driver of productivity. To me, productivity is about people. It's about then where they work, so the organizations within which they work, which can be public sector, private sector, and it's also about the context in which those organizations exist, so the broader external environment. And that's the kind of way I always think about productivity, but as soon as you think about it like that, then you can think of a huge range of factors that end up impacting on productivity. So a couple of things that I want to draw out. First of all, it's not just an industry mix type problem. So people often think, is it industrial structure? Productivity gaps between Wales and the UK exist across most of our industry groups. So if you break it down, it's a within industry problem, not just the allocation of people across industries. Having said that, we do have some examples. Manufacturing is an example where productivity in Wales is at the same level as the UK average. But for most of our industries, that's not the case. And indeed, in some industries, it's about minus 30 or even more % below the UK average. So it exists within industries, and the drivers are broad. I'll show you an image in the moment that the Productivity Institute routinely produce images around known factors that affect productivity to highlight relative strengths or weaknesses across regions, but also across local areas. So if you are interested, have a look at some of the data that they produce. But the weaknesses are across the board. So you're going to see a lot of red. They affect people. We have weaknesses in human capital, particularly in low levels, high concentration in relatively low levels of education, but also in terms of health, which is a neglected element of human capital. We have a greater proportion of those with long-term illness in Wales relative to the UK average. It's not just people, though. The businesses within which they work, we see evidence of sort of known drivers. Things like business spending on research and development is low in Wales relative to the UK average. Some of that may well reflect the kind of distribution of businesses in terms of size. We see small and medium-sized enterprises in particular reporting challenges around access to finance to support that kind of investment and innovation. But it doesn't stop within the organizations. And actually, I think the strongest message from some of the school boards is around the broader public investment, private investment. So that would be things like digital infrastructure. We have weaknesses relative to the UK average, broader investment, transport infrastructure. And I think for a nation which is relatively peripheral in terms of geography and it doesn't benefit from the kind of agglomeration economies that we might think about having a kind of central urban mass, that those kind of challenges around transport and digital infrastructure are going to be particularly important. That is by no means an exhaustive list of the kind of factors that are identified in the report. But I think for me, what comes across is one, there's no single lever. There's not an easy thing we can just pull to address this, which hence why probably it's a persistent problem, but also that many of those levers take a large amount of time. They are investments now for the future. And so we can't expect to have immediate benefits. What we have to do is make a longer term commitment. So this is just an example, by way of example there. The red is below the UK average, yellow is at the UK average, and then green would be an area of relative strength. And like I've said, you can see quite a lot of red, particularly around investment, infrastructure, connectivity at the bottom, but also in relation to health, skills, and business in terms of like research and development per job, SMEs with access to finance. And like I said, if you want to look at the kind of areas within Wales, the TPI, what they call these productivity scorecards, also exist for local areas within Wales in terms of relative strengths and weaknesses. But the thing I think the forum have spent quite a lot of time on, as a group, we clearly feel passionate about the importance of productivity, but it's whether that message is getting out more broadly. Do people understand what productivity is? And perhaps most importantly, do they realize what the benefits are to them of changing productivity? Do they understand their role in changing productivity? I think is an important question. So does it matter? For me, yes, of course it matters. Productivity is the long run driver of real wages in the economy. Why do we care about real wages? Key determinant of living standards. And for me, that is not just about money, but it's also about we know that income changes things like your health, it changes your ability to do social activities. It's much broader in terms of a way of accessing and improving well-being. It also matters for business profitability, business opportunities to grow, to invest. But it shouldn't just be business. So I think if you were at the breakfast briefing last week where we talked about sort of fiscal constraints and the kind of challenges faced by the public sector, and if we think about increasing demands, things like an aging population, then with the fiscal constraints we face, how are we going to increase the capacity in the public sector, address things like NHS waiting lists? We have to think about productivity growth within the public sector as well as among businesses. And then finally here, I've put as another dimension through which productivity should matter to us all. It's in terms of the government revenue and actually government spending in terms of welfare. If we have greater real wages, profitability, we have a higher taxation revenue, the government therefore has the opportunity potentially to focus on a wider set of issues, not just immediate public sector delivery, but also those broader social, environmental agendas that I know we care about within Wales. And that's why I think our work on productivity really links to the broader context in Wales, the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act. Many of the things I think that I've talked about in terms of productivity facilitate the kind of ambitions and the broader ambitions that we have in terms of social, environmental objectives, cultural objectives. But for me, it also provides a really good platform for productivity growth. We're encouraged to think about the long term. We're encouraged to think about future generations. And for me, the scale of the productivity challenge, its persistence in Wales, it really needs that kind of perspective. It needs people to commit over the longer term to enhance our well-being, but also, as we know, through intergenerational transmission, the well-being of future generations. As I've already said, I don't see it as simply increasing real wages. I see that as improving living standards and therefore improving other outcomes such as health of the population with big social and potential environmental benefits through carefully managed productivity growth. So what about that way forward? I think I've really reinforced the fact that it's not straightforward. There are lots and lots of different components, and that it's not going to be something that's going to be fixed straightforwardly or quickly. What does that mean? That means that we really feel that there needs to be a renewed sense of focus on productivity within the Welsh context. That starts, yes, with the Welsh Government. So there needs to be a leadership from the Welsh Government. But at the same time, as a forum, I'm always very aware that we call on the Welsh Government to do something, but actually Wales is embedded within the UK economy. And actually many of the macroeconomic levers that we have are based in terms of the UK government. And so I think Wales need to be represented on those kind of broader agendas. We've seen recently the kind of growth mission of the UK government, a huge opportunity for Wales to push this agenda forward. But at the same time, there will be regional implications of all those decisions taken at a UK level that need to make sure that we're not exacerbating regional disparities, or otherwise any actions that are taken within the Welsh context are potentially offset by things happening elsewhere. So it needs to be coordinated at a UK level and at a Welsh Government level. Clearly, there's a need for this long-term commitment, something that won't deviate, and we embed productivity into our decision-making in a more permanent way and in a more coordinated way. So the levers are multiple. It's not that one department will be able to solve this. We need to think about productivity in all our kind of policy making and decisions. We think that could be supported by independent expertise and scrutiny. And we think that that could come from something like a productivity commission, where you get external expertise, academic expertise, business expertise to come in and provide government advice on policy, to try and do the real difficult questions around how should we spend money if we want to improve productivity, but also that really important job of reflecting, evaluating past policy, drawing in the wider expertise so that Wales isn't alone in terms of we can learn from best practice nationally and potentially internationally. And that also provides a really public commitment to productivity and an institution which hopefully then is able to make this long-term commitment and is not so focused on the kind of short-run challenges that we know affect contemporary policy. In relation to that, we make a big emphasis about investment in people, human capital. We know that Welsh Government has policy levers around education, health, that is clearly going to be a long-term investment. And then in terms of infrastructure, as I mentioned, some of the challenges around the peripheral nature of Wales. But the challenge, I think, is so persistent and so large in magnitude that the Welsh Government will need much broader support if we're going to make progress on this. And that's where everybody, I think, comes into better understanding productivity. That's businesses, but that's individuals, and that is also the public sector in terms of delivery. So we would like to start a national conversation around productivity, around the challenge, why it's important, better understanding of what productivity is, how it's measured, so we can get that broader buy-in to this agenda going forward. Some specifics, we would recommend a business toolkit. We hear time and time again that businesses don't necessarily have the time or the expertise to know how to improve productivity, how it's measured. So we recommend a toolkit around what is productivity, how is it measured, some really good examples, context-specific examples of how productivity can be increased within that particular context. And again, that can draw from expertise. You know, we know that there's a big distribution in terms of productivity across firms. We need to share that expertise to improve productivity amongst other businesses. And then the final thing, which I think I've mentioned, is a real inclusion in the public sector. In this agenda, I think there's always a tendency to focus on businesses, productivity, but actually, given the prevalence of employment within the public sector, given the importance of the public sector to many of those drivers, you know, if we can improve productivity in terms of health and education, then we're already improving some of those drivers that we've talked about national productivity. There's been huge steps forwards in terms of measuring and understanding productivity in the public sector, and the devolved nations seem to be a really good opportunity to further analyse that and better understand what drives productivity in the public sector. So I think that's really what I wanted to say from the report. I do hope that you have comments, suggestions around anything we've missed, but also is that an agenda that people can buy into and take away within their own organisations. Before we come back, though, to that broader discussion, I really welcome Gregory Thwaites, who's Research Director at the Resolution Foundation, to provide that external picture, I think, on how Wales is faring. Thank you.
Thank you, Melanie. Can everyone hear me okay? And is the mic working? Sounds like it's working. So I have some reflections on this report, and my first thing I want to say is, again, just to make this real for you, this chart shows productivity for the whole UK and real wages, so how much you can buy with what you earn in the blue line for the whole UK. And you can see that before the financial crisis in 2008, these things were growing quickly. And if we'd kept growing at that rate rather than basically stagnating since then, on average, we'd have about £14,000 a year higher wages. So that's a lot of money. You know, when I drew this chart, I spent a long time thinking about what I would do with that money. I wonder what you guys would do with that money. But you know, this is real money and ordinary people's, everyday people's lives we're talking about. It's not just a number on a spreadsheet. So my reflections on the report are as follows. It's an extremely thorough and comprehensive report. And as a productivity nerd, I learned a lot from reading it. And the key points for me in it were that there's a huge productivity gap with the rest of the UK, but it's much smaller if you exclude London and South East, actually. So the difference between those, the other regions of the UK and those two is much smaller. And London and South East look like they've got kind of northwest continental European levels of productivity. And the second point, I think possibly the most interesting one, is that the productivity gaps are mostly within rather than between industries. So it's not that, or not mostly, that Wales lacks high productivity industries like financial services or IT, so much as the ones that it does have just don't do as well as ones elsewhere in the country. when we're talking about Wales, it's obviously a political unit and a geographic unit, but in many important respects, it's not really a single economic unit, is it? And when you look at the north and the south of the country, how much better connected they are with the bordering bits of England, it's, I suppose, not obvious that you see these huge inequalities between regions in Wales. And the whole country, the whole of the UK, has problems with health and education, and it seems like those problems are even more serious in Wales. So those were the points that I took from the report, but you've got to go and read it yourself because it's excellent. And the things I want to know more about now are, and maybe for the next report would be to do with the size distribution of businesses in Wales. So have we got lots of small businesses or lots of big businesses? I'd like to know more about that. Of course, the data is challenging. I would like to know about dispersion in productivity across firms within Wales. Why do I want to know this? So if you think of an industry that's made up of a number of firms, it's completely possible to make that industry more productive without changing the productivity of any of the firms in that industry. So each firm stays as productive as it was, but it's possible to make the whole industry more productive. How is it possible to do that? It's possible to do that by moving the resources, the capital and the labor from the less productive firms to the more productive firms. And that means that the average productivity is going to go up because the more productive firms have more of the resources in them. And so this is why it's super important to discuss and to examine the dispersion of productivity across firms. So how big the gaps between the leaders and the laggards are. So we know how much you can get from that reallocation and how much of the average you can increase just by closing down the least productive firms and moving the workers to the more productive firms. Now, it's really tricky to do this. I think it's even trickier to do this for like a subnational unit. But that would be like something I think would be super interesting for next time. Let's talk a little bit now about what the government's policy for growth is. So I don't know if you saw Rachel Reeves' speech yesterday. When we wrote about it, we said that her economic strategy has been quite hazy until recently, but it's starting to become more concrete, and that's in both senses of the word. One is that we're starting to see a little bit more what it's about, and then secondly, a lot of it is to do with building things and pouring concrete. And, we've heard about the Iron Chancellor, but I feel like Rachel Reeves is like going to be the concrete Chancellor. There's going to be lots of hard hats. And that makes a lot of sense in a country like the UK where it's been very difficult to build, very expensive to build. The fact that we like to quote at the Resolution Foundation is there's a proposal for a thing called the Lower Thames Crossing, which is another tunnel to the east of London going under the Thames. And we have spent several hundred millions of pounds already on the paperwork for this crossing, and no one has picked up a shovel yet. Like, it may not even get built. We haven't even decided. We have spent more money on the paperwork for the Lower Thames Crossing than it took the Norwegians. And if you've ever been out for a drink in Norway, you'll know that it's not a cheap country. We spent more money on the paperwork than the Norwegians managed to spend building the world's longest road tunnel, right? That's how bad the problem is in this country. And I think one of the things that she's trying to do is, and I agree with this, is make it easier to build in this country. So I suppose if I was to kind of think about what her strategy looks like, the first one is to do with economic stability. So I think the government wants to not do some of the crazy things, the unforced errors that its predecessors did. So two big ones would be leaving the European Union and leaving the European Union in the way that we did. You could have done it differently if you felt like you had to do it. And then secondly, Liz Truss's mini budget. And I think they convinced themselves that if they stop doing these crazy things, then that would be, a large part of the solution. And they haven't done anything crazy over the past 6-7 months, but like the economy is not yet at warp speed, is it? So I think they've realized that they need to do more. So they're going to try and build more houses, try and put them in the right places. They've talked a lot about public investment and the National Wealth Fund. So that's another sense in which they'll be pouring lots of concrete. They want a closer relationship with the European Union, but they haven't said what that is yet. The things they've talked about so far are very kind of micro, I suppose. I mean, they're worth having. So agreements on plant and animal health, agreements on touring musicians, product standards and so on, but they don't really do a huge amount to redress the huge costs that Brexit's put on the UK economy. So I don't think that Brexit is a catastrophe for the UK economy, but it is a disaster, and we need, don't we, to try and to do a bit better. And for me, that's the biggest thing that they're still very timid and hazy on. Then another thing is that they've published a green paper on an industrial strategy. We're looking forward to a white paper next, and so there are a few. So they've got this overarching growth strategy that Rachel set out yesterday, but they need to fill in the details with like the trade strategy, the EU strategy, the industrial strategy, the public spending review that will be concluded in June with like 100 billion extra public investment. What's that going to go on? So there's still lots and lots of details to fill in, but that's what I think the government is trying to do about this. And it's important for us to bear that in mind when we're thinking about what we want them to do differently. When we ran some of these numbers a few months ago, we tried valiantly or foolishly to try and put some numbers on the government's growth strategy and the difference it might make. Now, back in last year, the government's target was to make the UK the G7, the fastest growing country in the G7 in per capita terms. And what this chart shows you is that this is the forecast that the IMF had for the UK's growth went back in October for 28-29. And so the IMF expected the economy to grow about 1% a year. The IMF expected the Americans to grow about 1.5% a year. And so that's about a 0.5 percentage point gap difference. And we thought that some of the things that the government had announced, its infrastructure, reforms, its housing, trade policy, reductions in uncertainty, can chip away at quite a lot of that. But we still think there's more to do. And it's also really important to notice that the UK economy isn't growing at all in per capita terms at the moment. GDP per capita is actually lower now than it was 5 years ago, which is extraordinary in peacetime. So even this would be a huge turnaround to begin with. I think what this chart shows you is that in the red line, we've got a measure of policy uncertainty in the UK. So how uncertain the public is about what the government's trying to do. And you can see, can't you, that in episodes of increased uncertainty, like here, you get a fall in investment, big spike in uncertainty around the Brexit referendum, a flatlining of investment. So you can see that certainty or lower uncertainty is important, but we shouldn't overstate the benefits of that, is what I'm saying. You can see these bars, the uncertainty bars are tiny here, they're almost invisible. So of course the government shouldn't do crazy stuff, but it needs to do more than just not be crazy. Instead, what the aim should be is to free up capacity for higher productivity activity. So you can see here that the UK has quite a large accommodation and food services sector here. So the x-axis, the horizontal axis, shows you how many hours are worked in each of these different sectors of the UK economy, and the height of the bars shows you how productive they are. So one way to make the economy more productive is to shrink the bars on the left and to expand the bars on the right. So to have the UK economy employing more people in more productive sectors like finance, ICT, manufacturing, and so on, and to shrink these bars. So that's one way of doing it. And why do I mention this? I mention this because when the government increased employer national insurance, people said that's going to harm employment in accommodation, in food service, in retail. And I'm saying, like, maybe that's okay. Maybe it's okay to shrink those sectors a bit. As long as those people find work somewhere else, they may well find work in higher paying sectors of the economy. And we should think that maybe this isn't a bug in that policy, but actually a feature. And the same goes for the minimum wage. The same goes for tighter employment regulation. Using these as tools to actually squeeze labour out of the less productive parts of the economy and put it into the more productive parts of the economy. Of course, you can do this too quickly. Of course, you need to be very careful that people get redeployed, that they have the skills to find these better paying jobs in these better paying industries. But over the long term, that is one source of productivity growth in the UK, or could be, and in Wales. This chart shows you the dispersion in productivity at the firm level within a given industry. So this chart, for example, on the red bars show you that the 90th centile of productivity in the retail, wholesale and retail trade and repair of motor vehicles and motorcycle sector is £394 an hour in terms of turnover per head, which is like more than 10 times as much as at the bottom here, £32 an hour. And this is what I was talking about at the beginning, about reallocating workers within industries, right? So one way to make the economy more productive is to get more workers into these higher productive firms here. So it's not about pushing all the bars up, it's about shrinking the size of these, the workers in these bars so they get thinner and making these ones fatter. And so we can do that at the industry level and we can do that at the firm level within industries. I'm a bit worried about the time, Melanie, so I was just going to skip a slide or two, but how much? Okay, all right. This is, I wanted to try and say something that maybe you hadn't heard before or you might disagree with, because I think if you have a panel and everyone's disagreeing with each other the whole time, that doesn't make for the best panel, does it? So I think this country fetishizes small business, and I think that's bad for productivity. Now, large businesses are more productive than small businesses are on average. There are lots of small businesses which are small because they're young and they're growing, but there are lots of small businesses that have been small for years or decades, and they're not really going anywhere. And I don't really see a strong reason to support those businesses with the tax system. So these businesses pay lower rates of corporation tax. There is an employment allowance in the national insurance system, which means that they will pay lower average rates of national insurance. They pay lower business rates in most parts of the country, and I don't see why. So I think the mantra should not be let's support small businesses. I think the mantra should be let's support young businesses, right? And young businesses start off small, but they don't stay small, do they, necessarily? And so that's the first thing I wanted to say, which hopefully will upset some of you. And let me tell you how this is showing up in the data, right? So before I get onto that chart, there's a really, really cool paper called The Industrial Revolution in Services. And this is about how it is that you get productivity growth in something like services. Now, the Industrial Revolution in goods was about centralizing production of cotton and steel in certain urban centers and then shipping the goods around the country or around the world. But with services that aren't tradable, that are delivered face to face, you can't do that, can you? Right, so how do you get productivity growth in those services? What we've seen in the data, especially in the US, but around the world, is you get these large multi-site services firms. Think Tesco's or Greggs or Kentucky Fried Chicken or that centralized research and development. Yes, KFC does do research and development in one place. And then they spread the lessons of that research and development around the country and make the retail outlets, the local outlets, more efficient that way. So they transfer information and know-how, and they do this with multi-site businesses. And so I think one really interesting place to look in the data is, are we seeing more of these multi-site businesses? Are we seeing more chain stores? So yeah, again, another thing that might upset you. I want to see some more chain stores, please, because I think they're productive. So what this chart shows you here, let me get this right. This is a chart of the number of jobs created in different kinds of firms, right? And the red line is the jobs created in firms which are expanding into new employment sites. So think of a retailer or like a chains restaurant, for example, expanding like a new branch of Nando's or something like that. Like that's happening less than that. That's the big fall in the gross job creation in the UK economy in the period since the financial crisis. And you can see here again, this is the number of additional employment sites added. These national firms and these regional firms are adding fewer and fewer employment sites over the data, and what you're getting instead is more independent shops. And so yes, I'm going to upset you even more. I don't think independent shops should be business sites should be fetishized either. And instead, you might disagree with that, but I think one way that we're going to get productivity growth back in this country is to get this red line going up and this green line going up. So we're getting expanding, especially this red line, firms expanding into new sites, and you're getting more people, more people losing their jobs, more firms going bust, but the economy as a whole doing better. So I think that I know what it's like to lose your job, and it's not something I enjoyed very much at all, but I think it's part of the growth process, actually, that less efficient businesses go out of business or shrink, and more efficient businesses come into being and grow. So I think the economy actually will be a healthier economy if we see more insolvencies and not fewer. I wanted to say something about agglomeration benefits. So we've talked about agglomeration benefits. Wales is a quite peripheral place, and it lacks very large cities like in England has a few, and there are many in continental Europe and the United States. And it's true that other things equal, smaller labour markets produce lower wages and less productivity. And this chart shows you that. This chart shows you the size of the city population in logs, so 100,000, a million, 10 million, 100 million, and then how much GVA per worker there is, so how productive the place is. And you can see here that if you take cities across the advanced world, across rich countries, you do see an upward slope, and then it does actually, you have to squint a little bit, slope up a bit in the red dots in the UK. But my point is that the slope of this line, even when you look at the blue dots, the slope of the line is flatter than you might think. So you double the size of a city and you make it like between 2 and 5% more productive. Now that's worth having, but it's not a complete game changer or a showstopper, is it? So what I'm saying is, yes, Wales is quite peripheral. Yes, Wales is lacking in very large urban areas, but there's still a huge amount that you can do, like Reading, Guildford, Milton Keynes have done. And if you think about the economic geography of the Republic of Ireland as well, there's a huge amount you can do within these constraints. So yes, let me conclude. I'm sure I've talked for far too long. There's lots that can and must be done with existing human geography and industrial structure because we are where we are. So I've shown you, for example, that agglomeration benefits, the benefits of places being bigger and more connected, they're real, but they are not necessarily show-stopping. And moreover, we don't need to transform the Welsh economy from one that's in some industries into others any more than the rest of the UK or the rest of the world does. That process is always going on. And that's because much of the productivity gap that Wales has, as Melanie pointed out, is within industries. I think the Welsh economy and the UK economy would be improved by more dynamism, which means not favouring small businesses anymore and accepting job destruction, as traumatic and difficult as that can be, as the price for the creation and growth of better jobs. And last but not least, we talked about the industrial revolution in services. I showed you how it's kind of slowed down in the UK and probably in Wales as well. And I think we need to reinvigorate this part of the economy. So what you might call the everyday economy or the local economy. That's what is the economy in most parts of the country. And I think part of the reason it hasn't been doing so well is because of the slowdown in the expansion of these big multi-site firms. So that's all I wanted to say.
Very much.
Thanks, Greg, very much indeed. Am I okay just to crack on? I'm going to, first of all, agree with Greg that we should support young businesses, but we should also support small businesses in Wales. Small businesses being the lifeblood of the Wales economy. 97% of Wales businesses are in the micro business, but we can debate that in the Q&A. Sure. But before I come on to what I'm going to talk about very briefly, which is a report that the Institute of Chartered Accountants for England Wales produces on a quarterly basis, I just want to pay tribute to Melanie and to Bart for the work they're doing on the productivity agenda, and to Andy as well Melanie's predecessor. This is an outstanding business school, part of a wonderful university, and the work that they do is outstanding on the global stage, and we should keep it and not lose it at our peril, because the climate is such that we need Cardiff Business School and we need universities to thrive and prosper. And you can clap. What I'm going to do is just to give a brief overview of our confidence monitor. And then I'm just going to give a couple of points that I wanted to take out from my thoughts on the proposal that we've been speaking about, that Melanie's been speaking about. So the Institute of Chartered Accountants is the professional body for chartered accountants across the UK and the wider world. We are global in our reach. Here in Wales, we have 3,500 members, and every quarter, and we have been doing this for the past 20 or so years, we conduct what we call the Business Confidence Monitor. Now, the Business Confidence Monitor is a interview with over 1,000 chartered accountants. We talk about areas such as recruitment, investment, prices, costs, and essentially, as I've said, it's a snapshot of what the economy is facing, and it's a future barometer of what's going to happen. So hugely important. Business confidence today has an impact on investment decisions tomorrow, and also it's an indication of the bandwidth and capacity to introduce measures and productivity. Bandwidth being hugely important, I think Melanie touched on that in terms of what people are thinking, what businesses are addressing their concerns against. So we look at areas such as competition, staff turnover. You can see on your presentation, on your screens rather, and you on this screen here, access to capital as we discussed, government support for business, the tax burden, ability to expand into new areas, availability of non-management skills, a whole raft of topics that we investigate and interrogate our members. Interrogate sounds too harsh really, but we ask the questions and they come back with the answers. The following slides will cover the business performance indicators, the percentage that they've seen in the last 12 months to date, and also the change expected over the next 12 months. And I look at it from the UK as a whole, and then also for Wales. And I should say that the confidence monitors are circulated widely to government and external stakeholders, so they have an appreciation of what's happening within the economy in different parts of the United Kingdom. So you will see from that, I hope you can see, that the last quarter saw a dramatic dip for Wales. Wales is the orange line, and it's fallen below the UK confidence index. And over the long term, you'll see the trend in business confidence in Wales pretty much mirrors UK in terms of tracking, although recently in the last quarter, perhaps unsurprisingly because of the budget, the confidence has dipped. What might be surprising is it's dipped further in Wales, and we were talking about trends earlier in terms of where Wales sits within the UK perspective. So across all sectors, confidence has dipped right across the UK. Some significance in retail and wholesale, which is of course particularly pertinent and relevant to us here in Wales. Property and construction have dipped right across the UK. I can't really see it other than IT and comms areas which have really done enormously well, and business services. So the picture isn't as bright as we would wish. The UK average over the last 12 months in terms of turnover businesses, those were answer the questions. Turnover is slightly increased. Exports, you'll see, slightly increased. Capital investments, which is significant, is down, and domestic sales is improved. But the Wales average is pretty much stagnant. It plays quite a sorry picture, particularly in terms of capital investments. The key findings, and I'm trotting through this quite quickly because I want to cover a little bit more as well. Confidence in Wales has dropped into negative territory, falling to minus 12.1, significantly below the UK average. We've heard that before, UK average in terms of productivity. Dramatic sales growth increased slightly from previous quarter. It lags behind the national average, and businesses in Wales have the weakest export growth expectations of any other region in the coming years. So, we have a significant problem there. And as a result, customer demand in the main business concern in Wales is the main concern in Wales, followed closely by the tax burden, hugely important. Welsh companies reported the sharpest increase in cost pressures of any UK region. And while they forecast will ease over the next 12 months, input cost inflation is going to remain above its historic average. Employment growth in Wales slowed significantly in Q4, and the trend is likely to continue into the next 12 months. And Welsh companies intend to reduce the rate at which they increase capital investment and RD budgets over the next year. It doesn't paint an enormously positive picture. That was the world falling around as we. It doesn't paint a picture. I was going to try and lift us all up in the last slide, which I had a picture of Annie and her dog, and the sun's going to shine tomorrow, but in light of recent circumstances, I took it out. But what I wanted to do was just touch on some of the areas that the report covers very, very quickly, because I want to leave sufficient time for conversation and rebuttals, maybe, Greg. You never know. We mentioned government buy-in, and Melanie's done a terrific job in the productivity forums, and a great job here in Wales. We had a meeting with the First Minister recently and the Minister for Business, and it is on their agenda. But it's not surprising that the bandwidth for government is very tight. There's always something that rises up the agenda. Elections are coming. And we've identified that this is a long-term approach. I think the report is great. I think that we have to be cognizant of the fact that we are a micro-business economy. We also need to perhaps look at the future governance of Wales, and a recent event here in the business school, I think sitting where Bart and Melanie are, was Archbishop Rowan Williams and Fiona McAllister. We need to look perhaps at the Constitution of Wales and how we're funded, maybe revisit some of Jerry Holtham's concepts and ideas of how Wales is funded, because if we're weak in human capital, in education, in health, low in R&D, access to finance, digital infrastructure, transport infrastructure, where is it coming from? Where's the money coming from to try and improve those key indicators? The toolkit, I think, is brilliant, and I think that needs to be rolled out, because you ask 30 or 40 different businesses what productivity means to them, you'll get 40 different answers. Ben and I and Max and Rian were at an event last year, and we asked a very successful business owner what their perception was on productivity, and within the answer was transport infrastructure. So the understanding and the mindfulness of what it means needs to be explained further and communicated more effectively. So agree with the toolkit. Yes, the industrial strategy will have to be looked at, and how that's going to benefit Wales. When does a disaster become a catastrophe, Greg? You mentioned. I'm not really sure, but we need to up our game. We need to improve what we do. We need to communicate it better. We need to communicate it more effectively. We need to turn uncertainty that you mentioned, Greg, into certainty, and that's easier said than done. And we need to turn confidence around as well. And so there are so many facets, Melanie, that the report covers, and Bart, which business will wholeheartedly support. And the way in which you partner with business is yet another indication of what this business school does supremely well, and long may that continue. That's all I have to say for the moment. Thank you.
Great. Well, it's my honor, I suppose, to chair the Q&A here. But that also gives you the advantage that you can actually kick off yourself. So, and I thought I would do that before we go immediately into the small business issue. I'm sure these questions will come up. But listening to the three of you, I sort of one or two things. So I'd want to ask each of you a little bit of a specific question here. Melanie, I think as you say very clear, there is no silver bullet. We know that. And when I ask you this question, we should be keeping that very clearly in mind. But I'm always looking for low-hanging fruit. Like, what is an opportunity out there where you say, look, it's just ridiculous we haven't done it, because it's just actually fairly easy to get at. So I've asked you this question on the podcast to say, what did you discuss with the First Minister? And of course, you're not going to tell us exactly what you said, but what do you hear and what do you think when you research this whole devolved nation here in Wales? Where you think, look, there is something we should really be doing it tomorrow because it would already help a lot.
Low-hanging fruit, thing that keeps coming up. Is it on now? So I'm not sure it's low-hanging fruit and it's not a quick fix or an easy fix, but the thing that keeps coming up, and it comes up in multiple different agendas, not just productivity, but around inactivity, around sort of the broader, I think, social and economic well-being, is to me around education. So when I see things like our PISA scores and discrepancies in a devolved policy context where we have the opportunity to improve and be better than other regions, I'm always really disappointed to see that we still have such a high proportion of the population with low-level qualifications. And if we're thinking about future well-being and intergenerational transmission, we know the importance of education for so many other things.
And what could change that? What is it in the education system we would have to do in order to make that happen?
I think that's obviously a much more difficult question.
Yeah.
I'm not sure we necessarily have the specifics, but for me, it's about investment in the very earliest years. So it's, I think that's where we're going to get the largest rate of return. And I think that's where the biggest opportunities are to change something. So it's even formal schooling and then very early formal schooling. By the time we get those PISA results, things are set. Essentially, it's much more difficult, I think, to increase the level of education amongst people who have been through that formal schooling process.
Yeah. Greg, you talked about a lot of the sort of national initiatives, and one of them you mentioned was industrial strategy. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that I'm really sort of puzzled about is to what extent are we really connecting a national industrial strategy to a regional or devolved nation industrial strategy? Robert also mentioned this a little earlier as something, Wales needs an industrial strategy as well. What's your sense, sitting there in London, from the ability of government to actually work with regions and with devolved nations on meetings you somewhere in the middle and matching up a top-down industrial strategy with a bottom-up approach?
So I think that they're probably not going to spread the benefits of the industrial strategy very widely across the country, actually, and that might not be a bad thing. So I think strategy is about choice. Strategy is about deciding what not to do. Prioritizing industry X means not prioritizing industry Y. So I wouldn't expect them to, and I think it would be a mistake for them to try and spread the benefits or the focus of any industrial strategy to broadly across the country. I think for Wales, looking at what I know about the Welsh economy and what I know about the government's industrial strategy priorities, I think advanced manufacturing and green tech would be the two ones to focus on, because I think those are the places where Wales has real strengths and where the government wants to do more.
Yeah. Robert, following up on that a little bit, is there a Welsh response to the industrial strategy? And do you actually to the specific suggestions that Craig was making here?
Well, I think there'll be a plethora of responses to the industrial strategy. I think organisations within Wales, I mean, certainly we've got the FSB here today. I know that Ben will have responded both at a national level and also at a Wales level. ICAEW will have responded at a national level and taken into consideration some of the thoughts and views and opinions that have been expressed by our members here in Wales. So I think there will be countless organisations that will be engaged, and the new Secretary of State is keen to engage with members of the business community, and there is a new business group council created by her to inform her where the opportunities might lie, and the door at the office, the UK government office in Wales, is open for us to communicate and connect with them. And I'm sure that many organisations represented here and online will be in conversation with the Secretary of State and the UK government. The key thing is, whatever we decide, just let's get on with it and do it. We don't have the time in Wales to wait and jam tomorrow isn't on the agenda as far as I'm concerned. We've got to pick the winners, pick what we're going to do, and then get on with it.
Get on with it, right. Well, let's get on with it. We have people online and in the room. So let's start with a few questions in the room. I'll take perhaps 2 or 3, then we take a few online and we go a little bit back and forth. When you ask a question, if you could briefly say who you are, who you represent, that would be great.
Alan Felsted, Cardiff University. Melanie, you asked for anything missing. And I think there is. I think there's an elephant in the room here that isn't covered, I don't think, in the report. I haven't read it in detail. But it's about people. I think you said that, Melanie. A lot of the discussion so far seems to me to be quite top-down. Government departments and so on and so forth, talk with Welsh Government, really top-level kind of discussions. I would suggest that we need to engage people more. And there's a lot of evidence suggesting that employee involvement drives employee-driven innovation, which drives productivity. I haven't heard enough from this discussion so far about bottom-up approaches. And I feel that's the kind of missing link, certainly in the reports, in the material I've read. And actually the charts that Greg showed as well, overlaid on that, I would like to see more analysis of employees, getting employees, their voices, and trade unions. They haven't been mentioned either. So I think there's a missing link here.
Do you mind if I take 2 or 3 questions and then we'll just ask each of you to pick up 1 or 2 of those? So there were questions over there, right? Yes, right at the back there. You first and then the person at the back.
Dan Ward, North Star Transition and Independent. I apologize, I haven't seen the report, but there's something missing for me as well, which is, I think, all these things have to be taken into the context that Wales, for several decades now, has been subject to essentially trickle-up economics, where all the investment has gone into assets. And Wales have just been paying rent on substandard infrastructure. So we've got huge amounts of legacy infrastructure in the UK, and this is both commercial and domestic. And what we're doing is we're paying huge amounts of money for substandard quality and continuing to. And that's now hit, alongside energy prices, that's hit a real problem where, the amount of reduction in capital that's free then to spend to pay on your employees, on startups, on getting new premises, on expanding, on equipment, and for those employees to spend into the real economy as part of their disposable income. And so for me, I think it's, and of course, a lot of these property owners as well aren't in Wales or maybe aren't even in the UK. So this money is leaving Wales, it's leaving the UK. And I think that is something that has to be tackled where, how can Wales maybe drive down the prices that are being charged for substandard quality infrastructure and incentivize those owners to improve properties or sell them at lower prices.
Good, excellent. That's a good question. And we'll take a question at the back, and then we'll do a bit of answering. Yes, please.
Thank you. Mark Lang, Cardiff Business School. Thank you very much, panel. Very interesting presentations. To coin a phrase, do we need a concrete chancellor, or is there too much emphasis on building things?
Good. That's a clear question as well. I'm just going to the panel. We have 3 questions: the people question, the trickle-up question, the concrete chancellor question, let's call it like that. And any one of you wants to pick up? Melanie, do you want to kick off?
Yeah, I think the people question, because I think you're absolutely right, Alan. And a lot of the work that the forums try to do is just get the public message about productivity, because I think you're right, everybody has a role to play, not just in terms of employees, but I think in terms of decisions that we make about education, health. Are they done well informed about the implications of that for our individual productivity and our future wages, career choices? I think there's just everybody should be engaged in that debate. And I know Robert has used his column in the Western Mail to try and get that message out more broadly. And I do agree with you that a lot of kind of decision making and contribution can come from employees in that, and insights. We've got opportunities potentially around homework, and I know there's a huge debate about productivity and homework, in which you're well aware of. And I think there are innovations that employees can potentially be insightful for and help the business grow.
Anyone else on the panel who wants to pick up on the people question? Or?
Well, if I may just very quickly, I suppose one question I have when we're thinking about investing in people's education and health, which is something I very strongly support, is it's important to remember that when people are healthier and better trained, they're more mobile. And I suppose one question for people who care about the welfare of people in Wales, or people who start off in Wales, is how important is it to you that they stay in Wales? So it could be that you train people to have excellent education and you give them better health, and then they take that education and better health and they move to Manchester or New York. And is that something that you'd be okay with? So it's really important to distinguish between helping a place and helping the people in a place.
Okay, now that we're with you, what about the concrete chancellor question?
Yeah, she's going to hate me for coining this phrase, but it's too late now. So I think what I do know is that the UK has a very low investment rate and has done for many years. And moreover, that most investment, about half of investment, is in structures. So when people think about investment, maybe they think about a machine or a computer or even an idea. But all of these things, machines and computers and ideas, happen and are made in structures. And so it's difficult for me to envisage an investment boom of the size that we need in the UK without a boom in construction. We know also that the UK has a relatively small and expensive housing stock. The houses that we live in are smaller and more expensive than in our partner countries. We know that location matters hugely for people's wages, and so when you are building houses and infrastructure, it's important to build them in the places where the people are going to be most productive. And then last but not least, we know also that there are housing developments or data centers that can't be built because there isn't the water or there isn't the electricity for them. So those kinds of building need to happen. And we also need, don't we, to refit our housing stock, our land transport, and our power networks for net zero. So we're going to need to double or triple electricity generation and transmission. Those things need to go down cables that need to be built. The electricity is going to go into houses which are going to need to be refit with better insulation and so on. So yes, I think we do need some more building.
So Robert, let's take this down to the Wales level then a little bit. So both this question on do we need more building, but it sort of is a nice segue into the second question as well about, the trickle up question around where's the value of all that going?
Well, I'll come on to the do you need a concrete chancellor? I mean, we don't need a concrete chancellor for investing in compound semiconductors, which we are preeminent in the world on, other than building new places to house the technology. We could be we are already, we could be even more world leading in compound semiconductors. This is something we're really good at. We could have done with a concrete chancellor when the Tidal Lagoon in Swansea was up for debate. That would have been a world leading, game changing opportunity to put Wales on the global stage, producing a lagoon which would have looked after our energy for the next 150 years and been an exemplar and a beacon across the world to show how here in Wales we are innovative and modern and dynamic and responding to the opportunities that present themselves. We could have done with a concrete chancellor when we wanted to improve the M4, because many businesses tell us that a huge problem of actually getting into Wales inhibits growth and opportunity. That argument has been lost long time ago, sadly. But those of us who have been making that argument over the years still bemoan the opportunity lost, the own goal that was created there. So yes, concrete chancellor, but also chancellor and governments working together and in collaboration to look where our strengths lie and work together to ensure that Wales has those huge opportunities. So, we nearly had things, but we didn't quite get them. Let's get some of them over the line, which is what I think we just need to get things done. Sorry.
Oh, is too much value, so the second question, is too much value leaving Wales?
I'd like to know a little bit more about what you're actually referring to specifically. I don't.
So if we look at households, I don't know the exact stats for business, but if we look at households now, rent. So if you're for rental, the income is 30 to 40% of people's income is going on the rent, and then you've got I don't know what the additional would be on just on energy costs at the moment. and it's similar for businesses. And I was at the South East Wales Business Climate Coalition event last week, and I talked to several business owners where they talk about the challenge they face in finding premises where, so either they can find premises, but they've got no ability, if they're renting, to then drive improvement and so in terms of energy costs and so on. And they haven't got security, so and they can't invest in that building themselves because the landlord might say, "Oh, actually, well, no, we want you to move on or to sell up and so on." Yeah, so it's
You can reformulate the question.
Yes. Yeah. So it's where that income is leaving Wales essentially. So and it's a real drag on. For me, that's like a drag on the amount of money that's available in the real economy, which is actually driving the real.
Well, look, any drag within the economy that adversely affects business and opportunities for entrepreneurs to invest in Wales and for businesses to invest in Wales and to thrive and prosper is an issue. So, in principle, I'm agreeing with you. I don't have the magic wand answer, but any inhibiting of economic growth is a concern. So, in principle, I'm saying yes, I agree with you, but it's a point that we need to probably explore a little bit more, certainly within the areas of the report. But it's a point well made.
Let's see if we have any questions online. Then we'll take a few questions on the.
Thanks, Bart. We do have a couple of questions online. Chris Bolton is online. Chris, would you like to unmute? Yeah. Sorry, two.
Can we take two?
Yeah.
Yep. Thanks very much. Yes, thanks. I've got a question around well-being of future generations, and I'm sure as the panel aware that it's only public sector bodies that are currently required to comply with the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act in Wales. I just wonder what the panel's views were and other frameworks that are around that may well drive sustainable development. For example, ISO standards, and with private sector firms already familiar with that world of ISO and BSI arrangements. Would you think that private sector firms, which may well already have connections in markets that are well beyond Wales, looking at these internationally recognised frameworks and standards rather than the WFG Act? Thank you.
And the second question?
The second question from Anne Ridden James, who can't unmute herself, but I'm going to ask on her behalf. Do you think there would be tangible benefits from having control back from the Crown Estate in Wales as they do in Scotland?
That last one, who wants to take that one, a very specific one? Robert, anything you were?
Well, I'm not an expert on Crown Estates. Someone in the audience help me.
Okay.
I think I know that it was an issue in terms of one of the barriers to the opportunity of tidal lagoon. So I think, I don't want to get into the realms of whether we should take it back or give it or whatever, but I think that there would be a case that could be made to make the relationship between Wales and the Crown Estates, and perhaps any other part of the country, easier and seamless, because my impression is that it's a convoluted and difficult process. So anything that could be done to streamline that difficult process is to be encouraged. How's that?
Good try. Good try. I wouldn't be able to say that, so that's great. Melanie, on the first question on the Future Wellbeing Act.
Yeah, so I think that was more the policy context rather than necessarily the business context. So I think it's the broader framework in which policymakers and particularly the Welsh Government operate around sort of investment in the future. In terms of business, I think the case for productivity growth is probably, immediately easier. I think we've got international examples, we've got good practice in relation to business, and there's probably greater incentive, I would have thought, for businesses to engage with the productivity agenda anyway. So for me, it's about the sort of broader policy context when we talk about the future of well-being. We're talking about health, we're talking about education, but for businesses themselves, there should be immediate tangible benefits around improving productivity.
And my experience of business means that the vast majority of businesses will want to do the right thing. They will strive to do the right thing. So if there's an opportunity and they can see commercial benefit, at the same time social benefit, which is so important to the business school, and public value, they will always try and do the right thing. So that's
Okay, let's go to, whoa, loads of questions. So we'll pick three. So I have to be a little bit random. Let's, the small business question, because that was early on. Who was the small business person? That was you, Ben. So Ben, a question. Okay. Ben first, then we'll take one of the ladies over there.
Hi, Ben Cotton, Federation of Small Businesses. Greg.
Hi.
Oh dear.
No. In all seriousness, thank you very much for the challenge, and thank you. Look, it's important that we actually rehearse some of these questions, particularly when we look at purpose for investment in smaller businesses and in some areas of the economy like hospitality, retail, for instance. So I don't agree, but I'm grateful for the challenge. But on that particularly, given that retail hospitality, for instance, have a greater prevalence in some of our more peripheral, more rural, and in some instances, more deprived areas, how do you square the notion of withdrawing or shrinking support and employment in those areas with the need to invest in our rural communities, for instance? This is one of the greatest conundrums we have in Wales, the prevalence of these businesses and a lack of strength and depth of industry types in more rural areas. But how do you square your analysis with the need to invest in some of those more rural areas?
Great. Any other question on small business? Because we're going to take this.
Big pile on, basically. Yeah.
Otherwise, yes. Here's one more question on small business. And that's the third question on small business, and then we're done.
Thank you. Yeah, my name is Daniel Vargas. I'm from Service UK. Just a quick question around also this role of relocating labor across the heterogeneity of industries. What could be the role that you could suggest around the financial products to do the same task of reallocating or leveling up or narrowing down the gap between different firms? Maybe products like factoring, I guess. I don't know.
Okay, and then we had a question on small. I'll take it. Small businesses here.
Thank you. Roberta Gozan from the Cardiff Business School. I have several things to say and ask, maybe. So one thing is, I know from the literature that especially skilled voluntary immigration, it is very much highly and positively correlated with like entrepreneurship and establishing new businesses. And they have more kind of growth potential in the US. So I was wondering if this is the case, or how those businesses are different, than native businesses here in Wales. Is Wales able to kind of attract those skills? And second, I don't know if there is data availability. So that goes into like, maybe Ufuk Akçit from the University of Chicago. So they have started a new data with Intuit. So they are collecting very detailed data on SMEs. And I think Wales is also included, but I don't know the number of observations. So it might be maybe a small percentage. So I was just wondering, for those SMEs, whether there are detailed management surveys, because managerial spillovers are an important aspect of productivity. And I don't want to go into papers and stuff and give citations, but so I was wondering, in those areas and what kind of data sets there are. And if there aren't any like good quality, is anyone or is the government, I don't know, planning to do something about collecting more detailed surveys on those people?
Okay. So let me first kind of row back slightly, or at least clarify. So I don't have it in for small businesses. I'm not a sadist. My dad ran a small business. I remember him paying them. He was a builder, paying the men on his own credit card at times. I remember a big, strong, grown man crying because he didn't know what he was going to do. I know how hard it is. I've seen how hard it is. I've worked in small businesses. What I'm saying is we shouldn't stack the cards in favor of them, because what we want is growing and productive businesses. And some small businesses are like that and others aren't. The particular question, though, is an excellent one, which is, all right, if we think the hospitality sector is too big in the country, yeah, maybe, but there are some parts of the country where there's nothing else or little else. And that is, I think, the single best argument against wanting these sectors to shrink. I suppose what I would say is that the hospitality sector is disproportionately staffed by young people on relatively short contracts, and so there is an awful lot of churn. And often what you'll get is, when you shrink an industry, you'll have people going into other industries other than the one that they would have gone into, rather than leaving it. So when you see an industry shrink in the country, and bricks and mortar retail is a good example of this, which has shrunk a lot. Employment shrunk a lot. That's mostly affected by younger people not starting off there and the industry shrinking through people retiring and not being replaced. I think there are alternatives in coastal communities, mostly to do with social care, which I think is a massively understaffed industry in the country. But yeah, you don't certainly want to push it so far that people in places in peripheral, let's say coastal towns, don't have anything to do. You certainly don't want to do that. What you want is you want to push it enough so that they have something else to do that might be better. And then on immigration and entrepreneurship, yes, there's substantial evidence that immigrants are very enterprising. I would say that the act of migration is itself an extremely enterprising thing to do, to leave one country and go and live in another. And I say that as someone who lives less than 20 miles from where they grew up. And it's migration is correlated with all kinds of non-cognitive skills like openness and risk taking, which we need more of in this country. And then on SME management, yes, there is some data on this. The data on like schemes to help small businesses become more productive is quite disappointing, actually. And the reviews I've seen of the evidence suggest that the take-up is low, and then the impact of these interventions can be low. Now, maybe that just means they weren't very good interventions. My friend Rebecca Riley at King's College London is the expert on this.
So I would say I have 3 points to you, and then we'll wrap this up.
Okay.
That I would counter. One is, yes, you want to support young businesses, but young businesses start small. So we need to do something to make sure that young businesses get a chance to get on the way. That's one. The second is a lot of small businesses play a large role in supply chains, and supply chains are messed up to a large extent, which is not necessarily the fault of small businesses. So I think that's a very important point as well. And the last one is we've got something like, particularly in peripheral regions, an everyday economy. And that everyday economy consists of a lot of small businesses. And sometimes they need help in order to make the place livable. So those are the 3 things that I will bring to you, and you can rebut it if you want to, or we can leave it at this.
Well, I'd looking at the time, I mean, I would love to continue the conversation, but I don't want to give you, I would love to have the last word, but you're the chair.
You can have the last word. Okay, let's take a few more questions.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
Okay, 2 ladies over here, gentlemen here. Let's take this row, and then to wrap up.
Hi, thank you. My point links to what Alan was saying about people, but it's more specifically around firm structure and ownership. So, for example, we know in terms of productivity that cooperatives and employee-owned businesses have much higher levels of productivity than traditional business firms. So is one of the solutions for Wales, tackling issues such as rurality, that we encourage a more mixed approach to ownership structures within Wales, part of the foundational economy agenda as well? So that's my question.
Great
Essentially,
question.
Should we be encouraging more ownership?
Great question, thank you. Your neighbor.
My question is about...
Sorry, introduce yourself, sorry. I have to remind you, introduce yourself. No, please do so.
My question is, to what extent is productivity a political problem? Investing for productivity growth it's difficult for politicians to commit to, because it's a hard story to sell to an electorate that have got delayed gratification, and to politicians that are facing the next election. So politicians are faced with immediate choices, and it's much easier to invest in something that the electorate can see immediately, something cultural, health, easing inequality. And I think these choices are much more painful choices in Wales, perhaps, than they are in England.
Yeah.
So, and productivity is a cumulative thing. So 2% this year, 2% next year, that 2% is on the 2% that you've already got. So that £14,000 that we've lost is because we haven't had the productivity, and productivity is cumulative. Now, we've got politicians now who have recognised it, and we've got Reeves and Starmer and Rayner, and they're on it, and they're out there selling the praises of productivity growth.
What's the question? What's the question?
Minister and some of her colleagues to be doing the same, and would that work?
Okay, that's the question. Last question.
My name's Tom. I'm from Nesta. And my question is about early years that you mentioned. The population growth in the UK is going to outstretch France by the 2030s, so 72 million. But after that, it's going to dip down. So the care of young kids is going to be really important, particularly if we're talking about future generations. So I don't know what your views are on those early years education in terms of how we bring people into the world in terms of values and everything, but also the value of actually young people being around and their contributions to the economy and their thoughts on, how do they feed into productivity as well?
Melanie.
Okay, so I'll come back immediately on that one. So we know that sort of the circumstances, your family circumstances at the point at which you're born are hugely influential on your later life outcomes. So if you're born with more educated parents, better health parents, that will affect your labor market outcomes and so on later on. So the first thing, I think, if we think about that intergenerational transmission, for me, raising productivity, raising people's incomes, a better home environment for the next generation is sort of the best thing we can do, really, to transmit that. To Vicky's question about politics, I entirely agree. There are always more urgent or kind of immediate challenges rather than productivity. There are always things that you could get shorter term gains. For me in the forum, it's about that message that this persistent problem, doing what we do is not going to change the situation, so we're going to be left with it. And I think this is the idea behind a productivity commission which stands independent to government and will see governments through, that they make that visible commitment that whatever happens in terms of political cycles, elections, that there is that longer term public commitment to productivity, and there will be people outside government still focusing on evaluating Wales's position in terms of productivity.
Greg.
Yeah, okay, so you made some really brilliant points there, Bart, and I suppose what I would say is it's true to say that young businesses tend to be small, but if we want, why don't we just subsidize or cut taxes for young businesses rather than small ones? So rather than saying, there's a small profits rate in the corporation tax system, why don't we say there's a new profits rate in the corporation tax system? Or like you don't pay tax for the first 3 years or something like that. Now, of course, you could game that. You need to think about how to design it, but let's target. If we want to support young businesses, let's support young businesses. And then the same with places. Like if we want to support places, and we know that those places are disproportionately populated by small businesses in the everyday economy, then let's support those places rather than supporting small businesses which may be old or maybe in large conurbations like London, because so we can target better. I think if that's what we're after.
Thanks. Great that you gave that answer. Robert, last for you to answer questions. Yes.
I think where businesses can learn from other businesses that are in different formats, then that should be encouraged. No doubt that there's some amazing social enterprises and cooperatives in Wales doing phenomenal work. I think the key is to get that communicated more effectively to a wider audience, and then if those businesses that aren't operating within those models can learn from them, what do they do well, and also vice versa, if you see what I mean, then that should be encouraged. And I think we in Wales are pretty good at that. We're pretty good at getting our message across, but also learning from exemplars. And I know many businesses that are exemplars in the field that you are talking about. And yes, let's learn from them.
Thank you. Great questions, great conversation, and hopefully this will get us on the way to unlocking the productivity potential for Wales. And the last word is to Melanie to close the meeting.
Thank you very much, Bart, and thank you for your sort of constructive challenge. I think that's what the Productivity Forum aims to do, to raise these issues and try and look for solutions to what is a complex problem. If you do want to continue to engage, we're always looking for people to speak to us, to bring new ideas. So please do reach out to the forum and engage after this event. All that, therefore, it leaves me to do is just to say thank you to everyone, particularly, obviously, our speakers for coming, giving their time to go for their really new insights. We thank, obviously, the Productivity Institute, the ESFC funding, and also all the work that goes on really behind the scenes here by the exec education team, George and Harrod, Wayne, John, everybody that puts these events together in such a seamless manner. Thank you, everyone.